subdivided in a plat or anything. It's just part of, it was remnant actually, what Rosecrest had done. So it was deeded to the city by a separate deed after the subdivision. And it is adjacent to the trail, which was part of our discussion last time about access and accessibility to the trail. So first of all, the open space analysis that was done. This parcel was included in the most recent amendment to the Rosecrest Master Development Agreement. And in this exhibit here, you can see it's highlighted green, which is identified as open space in the land use plan. The Rosecrest East Area Plan had a total development area of 945 acres. And open space provided in that area, as far as I could tell, was 180 acres. As I called the Rosecrest group and talked to them about it, they didn't include open space interior to these developments when they were doing their open space calculations. So I went into Pod 33 and just kind of took some areas of some of their open space things inside of there, because they do have a playground and some other things. And they met I think it was like 18%. So even taking this out of the overall and adding in the interior, you wouldn't affect Rosecrest's open space negatively. They would still meet their 20% or exceed it overall in the whole development. So, are there any questions on that? That was kind of clunky, but did it make sense? Or exceed it. So yeah, you can see the clubhouse site is 2.1 acres and the park with the pavilion is 0.3 acres in Pod 33. Which is interior to that. Plus you have other pods around this area that also have parks and open space. That add to the whole open space calculation for Rosecrest. I took these photos last week. I went up and wanted to check out the site, see how it was being used and what was going on. This was middle of the day. Jonathan and I went up and walked around, trudged around the site. And there was quite a bit of parking there in the middle of a weekday. So I think at night and weekends it loads up and is used as a parking lot currently. The slope, the picture's kind of dark, but the slope's really rocky, sparsely vegetated. Not much maintenance going on there. You can see the weeds are sticking up above the hillside. So I think it's something our Parks or Streets group would maybe spray once a year, but not do much more than that. With people parking there, there's a little bit of garbage starting to accumulate in places. And just off this photo on the left, there's a water meter that had been ran over, and so the lid was broken in. Talked to the water department, I think they went up and fixed it, but there's things like that are happening because this site is just being used and not improved at all, or not fenced off, it's not really being enforced or maintained or anything, it's just kind of just happening. So there are some concerns there with that. And so yeah, there's parking on the unimproved surface, and I don't know if the police are enforcing this at all. Probably not getting any, you're not maintaining it either. So I don't think there have been any calls from the HOA for enforcement or anything here. I don't know if there are any restrictions against this.
It's a private road,
Is
isn't
it private?
It's a private road, but this is public property.
And the property itself is something you can enforce.
So, the request from the HOA, just to remind you of this one, is improve this parcel. And this plan that's shown here is their preliminary plan. It would have to go through the remainder of the engineering review. It's probably pretty close. It needs a little bit of, I don't know, just a stamp of approval and maybe some engineering if the wall's above 4 feet. And some drainage, the drainage and stuff. But this plan would include a retaining wall along the slope to hold the slope back. It would add a sidewalk underneath the retaining wall. It would provide connectivity actually to the clubhouse parking lot and to the homes that are to the south area. Would add 22 new parking stalls. And as we've looked at it, the way the land's currently being used and the maintenance requirement along it, it seems to make a lot of sense for the city to do a deed this property to the HOA with a restriction that they would have to maintain it, that it would have to remain being used as a parking lot, and that the city could come back and use the property at any time in the future if it needed to. So that's the recommendation of the staff report. And
Would that recommendation or would that easement, whatever, require it to be used for public use so that anybody could park there to access the trail?
So it would be a deed, so we would turn it over to the HOA, and then they would maintain it, and they would be able to restrict who could park there. We are building the trailhead, down off of Sentinel Ridge, the larger trailhead for the Juniper Canyon Recreation Area. And that's where we'd like to direct people to. Since this would be off a private road, it seems like it would get really messy, for lack of a better word, to run people down the private road to park on the public parking lot.
Thoughts?
Kind of the biggest issue I have with it is just the precedence it sets. What about everybody else who has a piece of parcel somewhere that's the city owns, and it would make more sense if it was turned into this, it would look better if it was turned into this. And then we do this, and then how do we tell anybody else no? I just think that kind of opens up a Pandora's box for those types of things. We've been talking about encroachments onto city property, and it's like, oh, well, but you guys don't do anything with it, you don't maintain it, you can't access it, why wouldn't you deed that over to me? So that concerns me a little bit, especially if we're giving away property that we own without charging a fee or anything like that. Does it not set somewhat of a precedence for someone to have that argument?
And I think that it's almost like a fee in lieu on this one, because instead of the fee, they're improving, they're doing a lot of improvements to this.
So my thoughts on this, and I know I won't be here to make a final decision on this when this comes, but my thoughts on this are that if they're going to use it for private use, they need to pay for the lot. If they're going to leave it open for public use, that anybody can come in and park on it, then I'm fine with them, with us deeding over the property with the restriction. But if they're going to maintain it for private use, then we should be getting the appropriate compensation. Basically what Sherry's saying, like, if they truly want it for their parking, for their private use, okay, pay for the land, like fair market value.
So if we kept that restriction, if we ever needed to get it back, that would impact that price. You put a deed restriction, that does impact that fair market value, but that's something.
We'd have to pay for it back at fair market.
And then I would think we would need to maintain it,
If it was public, for sure.
right? If you do it that way.
So as the city council, you have a duty to dispose of property at the highest and best value. That's not just the monetary value as well, right? You can look at the cost of improvement and factor that into your cost of disposing of the property. Your maintenance costs, you can factor things like that into the highest and best use when you're looking at disposing of the property. And I don't think we've had an appraisal done on this property to determine what the raw value is of that land. But those are all types of things outside of the appraised value of the property that you can look at when making that highest and highest and best use determination for the property.
I assume the HOA's got a estimate on the cost of improvements.
It's been a couple months since we talked about it.
The reason, I mean, it's not in the report, and the reason I ask is just for that reason, right? So if it's a fee in lieu sort of thing, well, what is that fee in lieu? Is it compared to the cost, cost of the property,
Going up by the minute with,
right?
construction costs.
And then the maintenance. I don't wanna maintain a dozen parking stalls.
Yeah,
Well, we just wouldn't build the parking stalls.
So the,
I mean, if they have it if you're required to be open for public use, then we have to maintain.
That's fair.
so staff's recommendation would be that the property be deeded to the HOA with a reversionary clause that if it were ever used for anything other than that, it come back to the city. As a condition of that, we can also require them to unimprove the property, right, and make it open space again, or have some other condition on that reversionary clause. That hasn't been discussed by staff, but those are all things that you could do in connection with that reversionary clause as well.
So I'm just to follow what David said, this comes back for a decision with a couple of new people. Just my suggestion would be, here's option A, option B, option C, with the things that have been discussed. Otherwise, we'll be starting.
And that's what we brought last. I felt we had a couple of options there, like.
It was-
This was the direction.
I mean, based on what we've just talked about, right? So if it's the idea of fee in lieu, well, what's the cost of the improvements, right, that they're paying that we aren't, right, to improve
That we can
it
take back at
with that
any
agreement,
point, yeah.
right? Because all of those facts are pertinent to the decision, and then the other thing mentioned is, yeah, we don't wanna set a precedent, which I agree with Sherry, that we've had all of those other issues, and this will likely come up again, especially with proximity to the mountain, for trails and things. So if we do wanna keep it open, then what does that look like? I mean, it's a matter of, is it worth it to us?
And I think the dollar numbers have to be there, because again, if somebody else comes and says, hey, you got this useless piece of property right here, I wanna use it. Are we just gonna give that to them? You know, we have to be able to show that we received enough compensation in whatever manner we received it, that offset the cost of the land.
Just me to have more cars parking, I mean, parking is a bit awful and all these things, but that's a benefit to the city if they're
Yeah,
not
for sure.
parking on the street, right? And parking inside.
Well,
So
it's not our
monetarily, we can show that, yeah,
preference.
there's a benefit to that.
And in the interim, do we want them to keep parking there, or do we want HPD to go pull the cars off, or? Do we wanna go into that?
I mean, that would be, for me, that would be a question for our city attorney to say, are we causing ourselves any heartache down the road if we don't start enforcing that?
Not really, I mean,
And so,
we're not really interfering with any other open space use there, right?
so I say,
It's not an improved piece of open space that is publicly accessible, and so that, there's not other than the property damage led to the water meter, box and things like that, I don't see a big issue with them using the property.
Would this be something where we just need to notice them, recognize you are encroaching on city property?
Just letting them know, wouldn't hurt,
Is it posted?
so they'd have to be there 24 hours anyways, right?
Yeah, unless we go up and post it.
Sounds like what we need to bring back to you, we can make some changes to the staff report, add that investment, so we'll have to get that from the HOA, give you some of the other alternatives and costs for the.
I might recommend a temporary sign just indicating that it is city property, but as far as enforcing and kicking anybody off, I don't feel the need to go down that road at this time.
I know, especially going into winter, you can't park on the street, and this gives them an option to park off the street, and that we're not having to go and ticket cars for being parked on the street.
But we wouldn't in there anyways, cause it's private, correct?
Right.
Well, we could ticket them for parking on our property is what we ticket them.
Oh, correct.
But it's good, I think it gives them a good option to be off the street.
So if it's not posted right now, and this is our property, but off of the right of way for the private property, unless it's posted, we have a 24-hour that they have to park, right? So,
You go post them and they'd have to move their vehicle.
Well, I guess.
we can't mark them and we can't interfere with the car, cause that's what happens, constitutional.
I don't think any of us want to go down that road. I think if nothing else, maybe some temporary signage just indicating that it is Harriman City's property. But other than that, leaving it alone for now until we get this issue, reviewed fully by the city council, and then make a decision there, moving forward.
Another thing to think about is if you were looking at selling the property and doing for a charge, the HOA might be interested in only purchasing from the sidewalk out to the street, not purchasing what's behind.
But we might not agree to that.
Yeah, we would.
You buy the whole parcel
Yeah.
and maintain the whole parcel.
That was what I wanted to know, is if,
I would
cause that would
not-
be a question if I was them, I would ask.
Yeah, I
Yes,
wouldn't
and it would be the
willing to do
entire
that
parcel.
personally, because if they're gonna buy the parcel, they want to maintain the whole thing. Then put in the retention and things like that necessary for the construction, parking lot.
I can have a different point of view. The city didn't pay anything for this land. It's not an important part of the open space calculation. It's not being used as open space. We don't have any plans to develop or improve it. It's just a piece of junk property that does nothing for nobody. And if it could be used to help with parking, because that's gonna come up in the later discussion, how lack of parking creates a whole bunch of issues. I think we should work to facilitate this happening and get some additional parking put in there. That's what I think. And as far as precedent, if somebody else comes with another piece of property that's a junk piece of property inside of private development that we didn't pay anything for, that doesn't have any other use, that we're not gonna do anything for, yeah, then yeah, we should make
And
the same
doesn't
decision.
impact open space calculations.
Yeah, then of course we do the other, we make the same decision, but, I mean, the precedent is it would have to match up with all of the things that this is, and if it's similar, then we would make a similar decision.
So Steve, I got a question for you in that line of thought. Let's say the homeowner across the street decides he wants to purchase that personally. What's your thoughts on that? Because that's essentially what we're saying is we're gonna give it up to a private entity. So if an individual decided they wanna purchase the property, would you say, great, you can have it?
Depends on what for.
For parking, for his 23 cars that he has. And that's where I just find some fault in the logic, is we're basically saying we're gonna give this to a private entity, which could be an individual or an organization. You know, is that?
For me,
I think that's a hypothetical, but the
Yeah.
truth is right now that an individual hasn't come forth saying they wanna buy it, or wanna improve it, or have 23 cars.
I don't know that
It's
that's
just
a fair direct comparison, because this would be to an HOA. I get it that it's a private, and you could have a request that came like that, but again, to Steve's point, there's a whole bunch of very clear points that line up that make this a benefit.
I agree.
I don't think your point of view is different at all, I mean, that's what precedent means, right? All these things apply, is it the same situation?
And just for some additional info, I just got it sent to me, the cost for these improvements is $75,000. So,
Tell me what's the acreage?
0.59, about 0.6 acres.
0.6 acres.
Yeah,
So
0.6.
just a little over half an acre.
Just for the parking lot or for the interior?
Seventy-
The whole parcel,
73K, is that what you said?
75.
Seems really low.
Seems extremely low.
Put in the
To-
parking
The
stalls?
pavement and some sidewalk.
Do the retention on that?
Cause it's probably just a rockery that would go along there. So.
There's no way.
Yeah.
They probably need to update that.
We need their contractor as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need them for one hollow.
There's,
Their contract, that'd be helpful.
Be our new parking contractor for the city.
but if we figured out square foot, it's probably pretty close to pavement square foot, cause this is a pretty small area, 22 stalls.
So just to back up, you're
It's not a
asking,
significant amount of earthwork other than right where they're talking about the little retaining walls.
you're asking for it to be signed but not enforced.
Just sign that it's Harriman City property. Just a temporary sign even, just to make it clear that we're still figuring it out in the short term.
I'm wondering if maybe an alternative would just be to send a notice to the HOA, just be very clear
Defer
that
to
it's.
legal on that.
Yeah.
Wherever he
What's-
wants.
What's the minimal cost?
So they're aware because they've come to us with this request, but I think just formalizing our position again would be helpful. And if you're comfortable with that, council, we could do that just by sending a notice to the HOA.
That's fine.
That's documented.
So I think we know we'll be bringing you back additional information in this town.
We'll try to get that on the first meeting in January.
Oh, so much to do in January. Have fun. Alright, item 2.2 is discussion pertaining to the request from Lake Ridge at Rosecrest HOA to have Harriman Harriman City assume ownership of the private roads within the private development. Jonathan.
Thank you, Mayor.
Do you need the clicker?
I need a clicker. Thanks, Blake. Alrighty. So we received a request from the HOA to consider ownership and maintenance of the roadway and the utilities associated with that infrastructure. Lake Ridge at Rosecrest is located just above Blackwood Reservoir. You can kind of see from the vicinity map. Then zooming in, everything that you can see shaded in blue is what's proposed to transfer ownership. Alright, so we received the request on the 27th of July, and we did an inspection. I call it an inspection, maybe it's an audit, I don't know what you wanna call it, but we went out and kinda just did a quick little check, say, okay, here's what we would do normally if we were to check a development. You know, say, hey, this is what it would look, or these are the punch list items that would need to get fixed, if we were to take it over. And so we completed that punch list and then placed it into a memo. Now, obviously, we wanna withhold submittal of that memo after we talk with council and kind of get the council's weigh in on what direction we want to take. So just going through those, that's all right. So the existing corridor width is 50 feet. The minimum corridor width for the standard is 53, so additional 3 feet would need to be
Installed.
dedicated and installed. Yep. So the public utility easements sit just on the outside edges of the corridor, the 50-foot corridor. So they would also need to be moved out to be on that extent of the 53 feet. The existing asphalt width is 25, minimum required is 28. The type of curb is different than what we typically require. So there's no sidewalks, and our standard requires a 5-foot sidewalk on each side and park strip. So this is specific items to storm drain infrastructure. It's kind of hard to see, and I apologize, but the line in yellow, this piece right here, is what is existing. And if it were to comply with the standard, we would need to install what you see in blue or light blue. And those are my best estimations at doing engineering with a, kind of like a Sharpie, for lack of better terms, right? So and we'll get to this here in just a little bit, they would be required to hire a consultant to kind of take a look at or show what the improvements would look like. And so these improvements would have to be designed and stamped by a professional engineer. So in reflecting in this, so there's obviously there's a stretch of storm drain infrastructure that would have to go uphill a ways, and then there's some additional catch basins or inlets along the way. So there's existing inlets here, so they would just install those laterals to get from the other side of the road. Alright, and then there's a curious item here. So here you can kind of see this faint white line. That's the 50-foot wide corridor. They would obviously need to extend that to be 1.5 on each side, or 3 feet on one, whichever, but 53 feet wide. And you see a little bit of an encroachment here, that resident. We add that as a punch list item. The streetlights, their location would need to get moved if we needed to install sidewalks and park strips. If they're also wiring doesn't comply with the standard, there need to be junction boxes installed by each streetlight. I think we found 2 of them. So they would need to be wired so that they're kind of tied into each junction box. There's some issues with the meter boxes, but they're pretty incidental. Now going into procedural notations, suggestions, at least from the engineering department, is for them to get that additional 3 feet of acquisition, and then the PUEs, the public utility easements, extended out. They would, and also those improvements, they would need to go through a plat amendment. And my understanding would be that they would need to go to planning commission for that plat amendment. And then of course, then they would have to go through the preliminary plat process, stewarded by planning, and then the final plat process, stewarded by the engineering department. And so we would also suggest that be completed as well. And so then kind of backing into and I'll say this, and I do this with every recommendation, I'm certain there's other options that we could consider we'd be amenable to. These are the 2 standouts, obviously recommending the first, which is considering the ownership and maintenance upon the completion of the punch list that you saw today, or the other option is simply to dismiss the request. Just stating for the group here, we do have a board member representing here behind me, in case you have any questions for them. So.
Did they give you a reason as to the request in the first place?
It sounds like the board got together and they met, and for not all the reasons known to myself, say, hey, we would like to turn this over to the city. Was the direction they got together as a board.
There were some comments made to me about how it's being used publicly with school buses coming up and down the road. people coming from other public streets down the private street to exit out, that kind of stuff, so, it's, without an ability to restrict public access, it's being used by the public, but they can't restrict it because it would only create one exit from the other rest of the housing area for fire issues. So it's almost like they have to use the private road as an additional access for the subdivision, so there's some layers of complexity there with all of that, but essentially that because it's being used as a public right of way, they feel like there should be some public contribution to its upkeep.
Is it just that
and maintenance.
lower portion primarily that's being
It's
used from that
from
connection point?
Lower Bugle Drive, that corner around out to whatever that road is out there, where Black Ridge comes out there.
So where the red circle is?
It's about where the red circle is.
Yeah, about right there on that road
There,
down
and
to
then
the right. Yeah,
Yeah, so this is public, right about, I'm shaking, right
Don't
about
they
there.
have, don't they have like a gate right there?
It's an entrance monument,
Yeah.
but it's not
That
gated.
says, but it does say private road on it. And they do enforce it during the summer season when there are people trying to use the reservoir, correct?
I thought that you also said that you had to cut down in the asphalt and make sure that that was all compliant with us too.
That is also an item on the punch list with the memo, which is they would need to do pull out some core samples of the asphalt and the base thickness to make sure it complies with their
It
requirements.
seems like it's gonna be a pretty substantial cost to them to.
If it doesn't comply with the asphalt, and yes, I would agree, even if the asphalt did comply, there's some pretty significant improvements along the roadway. One item I might maybe just beg some thoughts here, Blake, do you have any additional insight onto the development of, this was a second access here for this neighborhood, was there?
I need to look into that, but I know when Lake Ridge or Plat W came in, that there was a lot of discussion. It was like right before, or right when I
W
started
is
here.
this project here.
When that subdivision came in, there was discussion about this second access out of Lookout Ridge through here. So it may have been a requirement. I haven't looked that up yet. I'll pull it up here while we're talking.
Is there any reason they can't put a fire gate there?
No, it was actually planned for it, but, well, everybody would have to have the code. So, everybody out of Lookout Ridge, cause it's their secondary access, and everybody in Lake Ridge would also need the code. So,
Pending UFA's being amenable to that crash gate as
UFA
well.
so that was discussed as well. The gates were actually supposed to go down to.
Up
Yeah,
to
I
where
remember
Perpetua's,
all
right?
sorts of discussion about gates on this.
Yeah, the
Back
gates
in
were
the day.
gonna go down at the entrance to Lake Ridge, which is just right after the Black Ridge Reservoir
Right.
exit.
So I understand obviously why, there, are, at least previously, some private roads were constructed to not the city standard. Can you explain to me why we have such the deficiency in the storm drain component of this? Why would, storm drain is gonna be the same, no matter whether it's a private road or not. So how did we end up with the significant deficiencies there?
That's a good question, Clint, and I don't know the answer 100%, but if it's okay, I could speak that a little bit. Now, typically, what you're seeing here is a requirement that is strictly right out of the standards as they exist today. Now, we allow a provision in the standards that say if you can show, someone with a licensed PE, they can show that it works without this requirement, and they're given a deviation to the standard application approval, they can do that. Now, that documentation, as I was looking for, it didn't exist, so I don't know all the institutional knowledge
Because
to
what
allowing
you're,
that.
basically what you're saying is there is all of that water, and there's a pretty good slope incline to that road.
Yeah, and
Every
there's-
bit of that has to drain all the way down to at least
There.
that first junction
To
point
that
there
one there?
for drainage.
That's correct. That one there, and that's only on that one side of the road, and then that one there as well. The standard is 400 feet, so I just kind of chased this up. So you have 400 foot there, 400 foot there, 400 feet, 400 feet. And so they can show it, some calculations, they can show, hey, this will work with just the way it is, but until that, the burden of proof is on them to show to us that that's the case.
What's the operational cost for us, the ongoing maintenance cost of plowing, and, cause that's a pretty steep slope, so now we're gonna have to figure out how to get plows up there and handle all of that if it's a private road, which I'm assuming is part of the reason they want to make it public, is so that we're taking care of those maintenance.
Yeah, it would have to get added to the schedule, and maybe if it's okay, Justin, you're right if I punt that one to you.
Yeah, I mean, overall, you know, annually, the cost wouldn't be that much, but I mean, obviously it does add square footage to asphalt, to asphalt maintenance. Snow plowing, there wouldn't be a large, you know, addition there. I mean,
What's the lifespan
we
on that?
plow the roads.
Yeah, the other question is what's the lifespan on that road? I mean, is that a road that's gonna need to be replaced sooner rather than later, that the maintenance hasn't been
Obviously,
done?
the course that
course.
Jonathan referred to would be, you know, give us those answers, right?
We wanna
We
shoot.
don't know how thick the asphalt is, we don't know how thick the base is.
I do remember, I mean, I don't remember all the details, I was on the planning commission at the time that this came through, and I mean, I remember that, certainly we talked about it, and it was a definite desire because of, again, location and some of those things for this to be private.
Yes.
And certainly that second access was discussed. But again, I was surprised when it was built without the gates, because the gates were approved to be part of that. And to limit that,
Specific.
obviously there's, you know, because it's open, people are going to use that. Again, I don't know why the decision was made not to, but I do know that it was as an emergency second egress for that area above. And again, the gates were approved there, and so for me, that gives me a little bit of pause, knowing the direction that they wanted to take it and the plans that were submitted and the approvals that were granted at that time. Again, regardless of what decisions were made, why they didn't do those, but again, some of those circumstances as far as the public nature of it being used right now was simply created by decisions that were made at the time to not construct those gates, so.
I mean, is there any reason they can't construct the gates now?
The approvals still exist.
Was it a condition of the planning commission? That's usually how these get passed, right?
I get-
They say, here's the requirements that we.
Usually it has to meet, just,
then-
you know, it has to meet the ordinance and the fire access. Usually all that's incorporated into the
When
approvals
they,
at the
when
time.
they do the presentation, it's here's all the things we're gonna do, and gates is always part of it. We've just seen several of them come back where the last second the builder just doesn't pay for it.
Blake's looking at it, it's not actually in
This
that.
had an approval in 2007, and it was generic. Engineering plans need to be reviewed by engineers.
That's good.
Receive and agree to recommendations from other agencies.
Wasn't there another approval
Sounds
for
like they
the
still
other,
need to-
Open space.
for the other plat though, that came after that?
Look
Cause there's two, there's the one right next to it, isn't that the one?
out Rid, I'm looking at Plat W's approval,
Yeah,
and so there's nothing for fire gates here that I can see, and there's nothing
well, that was
for-
just covered by the fact that it was approval of the other agencies. That would have to be honestly signed off by fire.
And I remember talking to the fire marshal, when this was all getting constructed. And the gates, they decided to put the columns in, and the gates could go in later. And
Yeah.
that's where the discussion was, well, if you put the gates in, we gotta have a code for people to get in and out. And if you have the code, since that's the second access, everybody up in Lookout Ridge has to get a code. And the HOA at the time said, we don't wanna give everybody the code, we'll just not put gates, is what I remember.
That's what I remember as
Yeah.
well.
And so, again, kind of back to just the point, I understand the public nature of them being used, but again, that wasn't the original plan, that's just a result of some of the
The choice
decisions,
they
the
made,
changes made moving forward. So,
We need to verify that second access things.
Yeah, and I think it's a combination of, we've seen a lot of times where developers have built roads less than city standards because it's cheaper,
Yes.
right? So,
can
enough
put
for
in
the
more
same money,
units.
right? There was an element of this, development into Lookout that's a little more, exclusive in nature, which was catering to the private roads and gated access, and all that kind of stuff. Which I think was a great plan to start with, right? I think there was a reason for that. But because all of that stuff, for whatever reason, hasn't come to fruition, that's part of where their request is coming from at this time. I'm not saying yes, no, right, wrong, but decisions that I don't know that all the current homeowners were a part of or made.
Probably not, yeah.
Is leading to a situation that they're trying their best to accommodate right now. And so, whether or not that is, hey, we proceed with the memo, here's all the changes you have to make, and if you make all of these improvements and all of these changes, sure, we're okay to take it over. Or if we say, you know what, we're just not interested, we don't like it at all, even if you made all the improvements, we still wouldn't want it. That doesn't seem the most reasonable thing to me either. But at this point, I think the question is, do we want to proceed with giving them these instructions on what it would take to make it city standards, and then they can make their decisions about what they wanna do, and at least then there's some direction, they can come back and ask for, they can do the engineering study and find out if they need it to do the water, and if the core samples are great, they wouldn't have to do a lot of stuff, it might make it less
If we do
onerous on
that,
them,
is that basically saying if you do these things, we'll take it? Or is it saying if you do these things, we'll consider
Consider
it?
it. The latter. Cause that,
I mean, that's a big difference.
there's a huge difference.
Right? If it's just, cause I agree, I don't think it's reasonable to just say on this, but I'm very leery of setting a precedent. We have way too many of these in the city, and there is no way, we can't pay to upkeep the current roads,
That was,
let alone all of the private ones that are supposed to save us money.
yeah, that's what I would, Nathan has been really working hard on trying to do this tool that shows us when you make a decision, here's the financial impact it has on you. I'd really like to understand, even though it's like, well, we don't know or not much, or what
This
financial
one might be
impact
fairly
does it have
small,
on us?
but
About
there's
Six
so
thousand
many
years.
Just for the maintenance, if we were talking about having to maintain that road, so using the PCI number and the lane miles, if you run it, it's in the, what is that, 2020, was that done? 2019, so $2019, it's $11,500, so that's probably closer to 13.
And that's for that
Something
small
now.
portion of road.
To maintain a lane mile.
A lane mile.
That's about a quarter mile, so half a lane mile, you could figure that.
6,000-ish.
About 6,000.
5,000 to 6,000.
7,000 a year is what we would be agreeing to take on going forward. Right, so again, that's a very high level generic kind of approach because not every road costs the same to maintain, but it's not inexpensive. One option, I mean, we tell them, I would think maybe they would just want to
The
improve
lower.
this where they're having the issues, and then
That was an alternative I was gonna suggest as well, is that, because that's the part that's being impacted by public use, the public isn't going up the rest of the road,
well, and school buses are picking up their kids. So it's kind of hard to say that, but again, if everybody leaving here is coming this direction instead of going the other way, I think the sign says to go the other way.
It does.
But you also have all these homeowners here who may be using this cut through instead of going.
Of course they are.
Sure.
For personally, and I obviously won't be here, but personally, I would, like, as a general rule, I'm not open to taking on a bunch of these roads for exactly what Jared said. The whole point of these private, one of the main things that have been sold to the city over and over and over again, and I've spoken out time and time again about how I don't like private roads for this exact reason, was that it's supposed to save us money, but we all know eventually we're gonna start getting these requests. We're starting to get the requests that, hey, we don't wanna, we wanna give it back to the city and have the city pay for it, maintain it, and do all those things. And so, for me, it's a private road, it's gonna stay a private road. It's my 2 cents, I'm not gonna be here, but before I would even consider something like this, they would have to be willing to go through and do the entire punch list. I don't have any problem sending them the punch list, but before I'd be even willing to consider it, they'd have to be willing to agree to doing the entire punch list, including widening the road and taking the right of way from all of those homeowners along that road. Which I don't think is gonna happen because those homeowners are gonna wanna give up their property.
When we've discussed this somewhat loosely in the past, I think that's always been the thing, is that if they're private roads, almost always, I'm not aware of a single instance where they're built to city standard, right? They're always smaller and
That's why they always wanted to build
Right.
private.
that's it. But what's difficult is in this case, it's not townhomes where it's impossible to make it city standard. right, inside. I mean, those are the ones that we'll have to just say no, because it's impossible unless they're gonna knock down buildings. Am I wrong? Right, but for this, I mean, yeah, it's gonna be really costly to bring it all the way up, and that's, I guess, the line that I personally would draw is, I don't want to have any exceptions to the standards, right? I mean, I don't know what we can or can't do there, but if we're agreeing to something, bring it up to full standards so that we don't have to worry about anything down the road that wasn't brought up to full engineering standards. And then I'd be willing to consider it, right? But I don't want to set the precedent if we say, yeah, let's look at this punch list and then we'll take it for sure, then we're just opening Pandora's box.
Cause there's bound to be other things that as we're up there looking at it, there's gonna be, oh, we missed this, we missed this.
So I think there's a reasonableness,
Right.
to the approach, but we have to be careful.
And I think for all of those reasons, it's if all of those things happened and if it was fully upgraded and if it met the city standards and all this, I don't think there's a reason why we wouldn't.
No.
That's,
So I'm saying thinking ahead.
other than it's an additional maybe 6,000 plus going up per year in maintenance, right?
The other thing that I've kind of noted in the past, and we haven't had anything really come up to take it down that rabbit hole, is this is a fairly small portion, but once we go down this road, there will be more and more of them. Do we need to consider special service districts for these? That's part of it, right? Especially if it's higher elevation and costs more to get services up there, that sort of thing. If that's part of it, yeah, okay, we'll take it over, but
It's gonna cost you.
it's gonna cost you
Special
more
assessment
to help
stuff, yeah.
maintain it. So
Yeah, and that was part of the conversation we had, whatever, many moons ago about HOA disillusionment, and that kind of stuff and the impacts it would have on roads. It all plays into that overall conversation, right? So, I would say, give them the punch list and see how they feel about doing that. It's gonna be costly.
Understanding that punch list may grow as things come from
The core samples and all this and the other stuff too.
That is not a final say, do all, it could get worse.
Yeah, I think that it's simply that they have to bring it up to our current standards.
we can,
That's the
and we would be
process.
willing to consider it. That's it.
That is an interesting question though. If we were to do the work to bring it up to standards, how much would it cost and could there be a special assessment put on?
Well, I'm just
homes to
saying,
take
just
care
for,
of that, right?
just for the
For the
maintenance,
maintenance, if we take over people's
take over the
roads.
maintenance.
Just for the O&M, yeah, I got it,
because it hasn't been built into our taxing model,
right?
right? Hey, we're just gonna take it on and everybody else is just gonna
Start paying for their road now.
For somebody else's road, it's very important, yeah.
Cause I mean, that's essentially what we're being asked is these 10, 15, 20 people want us to pay
So-
for their road to be plowed.
You guys, I'm a broken record, 6,000 West Heritage Hill Drive, my neighborhood, like, we're not an HOA, pay for everything. The city does a great job patching the potholes, but that road's gotta be replaced and we can't get it done because there's no money to do
So let's take on some,
it. Right?
no money to do it.
Alright, does staff feel like they have some direction from the council on this one?
Thank you.
Awesome. We will move on then to item 2.3, discussion related to the request made by Bowler Development LC to approve an amendment to the Harriman City official zoning map for property located at 5652 West, 13100 South, from 2.93 acres of A25 zone to the C2 zone and 6.06 acres of the A.5 and A.25 to the R110 zone. Michael.
Thank you, Mayor. We're actually gonna have Talia Wright, one of our planners who is working on this project, make this presentation tonight.
Thought I'd come up here so I wasn't talking to your backs or anything. So this is an application for a rezone for a property just kind of up the street from here. There's a vicinity map to see where that's located on a bigger scale. Currently, it's zoned A.25 and there's a little bit of the A.5 zone as well. To the north, outlined in red are the parcels that they're applying to get this rezone. just some background, all the parcels involved in this rezone are owned by the Millers. There is a property swap with the Butterfields for the more northern property is being traded for the southern property, so the skinnier rectangle will be included in the rezone, while the more square-like figure would not be. They're hoping to create a subdivision. This is just kind of a preliminary drawing. Obviously, this is just the rezone. There is a right-of-way, right? I don't know if I know. Oh, there we go. So right here is currently is a right-of-way. So the applicant would need to work with the city to vacate that more western or eastern, part of the right-of-way.
So they're looking to move the right of way.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I mentioned, this isn't the exact plan. Engineering will review all those issues once the plan comes through for that. This is the general plan map, so as you can see, towards the eastern side is commercial and the western side is low density residential. So 1.8 to 2.5 units per acre. And the applicant is hoping to rezone it as such, commercial on the eastern side and residential on the western side. They're hoping to rezone it to R110. But as I mentioned, the general plan says it has that zoning, the 1.8 to 2.5 units per acre. So we wanna add that as a recommendation to stay within that density to be consistent with the general plan. It's consistent with the goals and it's in harmony with the existing surroundings. It's close to both commercial and residential units. So there doesn't seem to be any issues with those points that we have in our city code. So I believe the applicant is here if you have specific questions for him. But we're hoping to get some feedback if you have any.
Can you go back to the map?
Which one?
The one that shows the basic plan. Are we landlocking that one parcel?
Which one?
That one that looks like it's red?
So the red one's not.
That's not
I see what
included.
you're saying.
They're swapping that.
But is it gonna get landlockers that have
It's got
access?
a road going
So
out
what
the
I
left there.
think is important here is this layout. They're
It's
talking
not,
about
yeah.
the rezone.
Yeah.
The layout will go through engineering, and so there's been discussions about keeping, what is that, 1/30th south going through and tying in. And so, engineering would make sure when the subdivision came in that would not be landlocked. And be through the whole DRC
Have they made an
process.
application? Has it gone to planning commission?
Sorry, what was that? It's gone through.
Have they made an application? Has this gone through planning
Yeah,
commission?
so, I apologize, I didn't mention that. It's gone through planning commission and they've given a positive recommendation with that condition that I was talking
Just on the
about.
density?
They brought up the similar concerns with the roads, and we said, remember, this is just the rezone, and then the layout will come later.
So you go back to the original map? Okay,
Oh, this one.
that's fine. That's all I need to see, thank you. Thoughts from the council? Have any concerns? Nope. Jerry?
I like the old barn and sheep. Let's rebuild it somewhere else.
No, Wendy.
So it sounds like the council doesn't have any particular feedback and we'll be open to seeing this at a future meeting.
Okay, great.
We have a couple just questions, I guess, for the council. Can you go back to the one with the zoning?
This is fairly unusual to have these questions during our work meeting.
Mhm.
I'll allow it, but you need to make it quick, please.
That's kind of what the public hearing would be for, right?
So, maybe it's the next one, sorry. The one with the shows the zoning. That one. So I think the general plan that you guys are pushing through, or I don't know if it's passed through the council, but that southern end was planned to be commercial. in the new general plan. What would your pulse be if we made that commercial and the rest residential?
Are you talking what fronts Main Street?
Yeah.
All of that fronts Main Street?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody's gonna give you too much of a hard time for making that all commercial.
Okay, well, then the second part of that question is
That's
the
the
millers.
first person who's ever asked us that. I'm like, I almost don't know how to answer.
Well,
I'm glad I allowed
Can we
that
do more
comment.
commercial and
it's
less
a two-part,
residential?
it's a
What?
two-part question. So the millers who own the property, they wanna open a auto body shop. And so if we switch it, that would be the proposed use.
That's a whole different can of worms.
Yeah, that's a whole different can of worms, and here's what I would recommend is I would recommend that you work with staff to bring us some more specific details so that we can discuss that at a future date. So, appreciate it. Alright, we will move on then, unless you had anything else.
Great job.
Good job.
We will move on to item 2.4, discussion pertaining to the parking enforcement issues and challenges. This is at Councilmember Shields' request.
Yeah. So, the primary thing I just wanted to do was share some of the, reports I've been getting regarding some of the issues with, parking enforcement, primarily in HOAs, private areas. I just wanna acknowledge a couple things before I share all these. I'm redacting these to the point I'm not gonna identify which HOA it is or which towing companies are involved. Because that's not necessarily the important issue. I also think that we have all recognized, just like the earlier discussion, right? We have narrower roads, we have less parking, we have parking problems inside of these higher density HOA areas. A lot of communication has been around, well, who's at fault for that? Is it the development plan? Is it engineering fault? Is it people filling up their garages with boxes? Is it driveways not long enough? Is it not enough extra parking? Is it, over and, you can just list an ad nauseum amount of possible reasons why all this happens. I'm not here to tell you what those reasons are, just that there's an issue. I think that most of you are aware of a towing incident that happened in the city that got a lot of press and publicity about it. That solicited a lot of, or let's say that created a lot of unsolicited feedback from residents. And I wanted to share what some of their comments to me were, just because I think it creates, for lack of a better term, an understanding of what our residents' experience is with some of the towing enforcement. In almost all of these incidences, the towing company followed all the rules, all the laws. They didn't do anything untoward or illegal. They have, and even our conversation, I had another conversation earlier today with one of the towing companies, and they're very careful to be within the laws. They have cameras all around the front and back of their vehicles. On every single one of their invoices, it lists the Bill of Rights that all the people are entitled to. So they try to be very careful. That being said, there are some issues, and so here, I'll just share some of these. So, let me find this here. On Saturday night, my car was towed from a townhouse area. I had stopped to buy a computer that a resident was selling off of KSL. I had left my car running and ran inside with the individual to grab the computer, Venmo the money, and came out and my car was gone. The neighbors said they saw it happen and let me know. I called the company, explained, and they were rude. He said, too bad, there is a sign that I did not see. The car was there for under 5 minutes. That time issue is going to be a repeated theme in some of these things that I share. Next, this person explained they needed their car for their employment and would have to grab it right away, and asked for the address, explained that they could meet them there. So they called back when they secured a ride, headed that all the way to West Valley. When they arrived, they did not answer the phone, had to leave. When I finally was able to get my car, the place was, anyway, I won't comment on that. Next day, I called again all day with no answer. Finally was able to contact the representative, said they couldn't meet them for several hours. The time frame issues are violations of state code. So they should have somebody there 24 hours a day to answer the phone. They should be able to provide access within an hour. So those are issues that aren't related to us, it's related to the towing company, but again, shows some light on what's been going on here. Pull this up here too. A couple of comments, just kind of anecdotally here. I had a tow truck hook up to me while I was in the car. The car was dead, or else I would have moved it. Husband was at the store getting the part to fix the car so he could move it, still had to pay him not to take the car. In this particular instance, if the car is not functioning, it's obviously parked, it's not where it should be. Just because you're in the car doesn't mean it's not parked illegally. Another one, I was parked across the street from a no parking sign. They towed my car at 3 a.m., charged me $250 to get it back. Took a 2-year-old's car seat, how are they supposed to get around? You know, that kind of a thing. Not that those are the most important issues, but had sister-in-law was walking a niece to the front door, lights were on, hatchback was wide open, car was running, they hooked up and towed the vehicle. Had mother-in-law's walking a son with his things up to the house, came back, the car was gone. I think you guys are gonna hear this theme here. Had a car towed out of their own parking spot that they paid for, had to fight with the HOA to get a refund for it. Father was almost towed just a couple months later. Just had a baby 2 days later and the father was dropping off dinner. So he had just put the car there, was running up to drive the dinner, came back, the car was being towed. They had hooked it up and had to pay the $85 drop fee. I think that the problem is here because of the fact that almost all of these issues are happening on private property. There is really nothing that we as a city can do. Those are issues that have to be resolved between the HOA board, the HOA management company, and the instructions that they're giving to the towing company. If they are giving instructions to the towing company that they have a zero tolerance policy, and if it's in a place where it shouldn't be, they have a right to tow it, then the towing company is doing what they're supposed to do, and they're acting, for lack of a better term, righteously here, right?
And Steve, I think it's, you're really getting to one of the things that, first parts of this, I think to have a discussion is to understand that, again, these are all contracted between the HOA and these companies to do it, and the HOA sets the parameters.
Right.
And so where is that? That's where it has to start, obviously.
Exactly.
That's where it has to start, is between the member that lives in there, their HOA board and representatives, and what the HOA has contracted with them to do. That's the first place that this has to begin.
Right, and to be fair, in the conversation we had earlier today, which was very productive, it was great to understand the perspectives of the HOA, some of the challenges they're having, monitoring and enforcing parking, some of the costs associated with putting up all the signs and painting curbs and all the things that they're doing. Understanding the tow companies have certain procedures that they're following, mostly to avoid potential confrontations that could be, less good situations, which I think our public safety people would chime in that that's probably a good thing. But we asked them the question to consider, is there a difference between an active loading and unloading of a vehicle and a parked vehicle? How they might determine that and whether or not there would be a different enforcement. One of the things that the towing company suggested is that if a car has its hazards on and looks like it's being, actively loaded and unloaded or stopped with it's running. If it's stopped with the hazard lights on, they are more lenient, was the word they said, in towing those. But still, even if it has the hazards on, if it's there for 40 minutes, you know,
I was gonna
if
say,
there's
it
that
sounds
an
like
issue.
still a lot of subjectivity allowed.
Right, if
even
there's a
in that.
U-Haul truck, is that different than somebody with their pickup truck? If it's a Amazon delivery versus an Uber, you know, Uber Eats delivery, right? There's difficulties in determining who's who unless it's a FedEx, UPS, Postal Service, police, fire, ambulance, right? Those are labeled vehicles, they can tell what those are. They can't tell the difference between a private vehicle and an Uber delivery and, you know, something else. There is one issue that I think that this council can consider, and it's something that we have discussed, is there was a concern about the tow that was done on the video of whether or not that is safe. There were questions about what if there was somebody in the vehicle? What if there's a minor in the vehicle? What if there's a pet in the vehicle? That's a little bit of a hyperbolic kind of question. According to the tow company, they only have one on record with a person actually being towed in a vehicle. But I don't think it's an impossible concern, especially the way that the tow was done. One of the things that we had discussed was the possibility of creating a requirement that the tow company come out and actually do a physical inspection inside the vehicle to make sure that there's nobody there. Maybe do a walk around the vehicle to make sure that there's no kids or pets or something, you know, that kind of a thing. Based on the input from the towing company, they suggested that there were cameras that they can see very well. They drive by the vehicle, they can look in. He's got a big monitor on his dashboard that shows right into the, you know, front of the car, at least to show that there's nobody there. But residents raised that concern repeatedly of, is this the safest way that these cars can be towed? I suggested I would bring it to the council to say, these are the kind of problems that our residents are having. We had one, a person said that they had come from out of state, they own some rental properties and were delivering some appliances. While they were in the process of moving the appliances, their truck was hooked up, right? Since we can't do anything about that, are there things that we could do as a city that would be in the interest of public safety around this issue? And I think that is something that is as a question for this council to say, do we want to look into this? Do we want to discuss it more? Do we want Chase to come back with some ideas and some suggestions there? Or do we just kind of want to leave a sleeping dog lie and allow this something for the state legislature to pick up, or leave it to the HOAs to handle themselves? So that's kind of the question, is we know there's an issue in our community. What, if anything, do we want to do about it?
Well, I know we've all gotten some of these. In fact, I think I forwarded an email to Nathan and Chase about a week before all the public stuff. Said, look, I know we talked about this tow truck stuff several months ago, but this is still obviously an issue, and these guys are, in my view, being pretty predatory about this. What if anything can we do? Just the response I got was, well, we'll look into it, and then all this blew up. So update, where's the line? What can we do? What can we not do?
So the statutory framework's pretty clear, about what regulations apply to tow companies, and that's set by the state legislature. They also have administrative rules that are pretty strict about.
So we can't do anything that's more restrictive than.
Correct. So state statutes and the administrative rules kind of set both a floor and a ceiling.
So it's kind of what maybe we need to communicate to the public, is kind of from the ground up rather than from the top down. This is what we're gonna do and why. Well, this is how it works.
Right.
And so here's what we can and can't do.
So the state statute does anticipate that municipalities can do some things, but it does explicitly state, like you mentioned, we can't do anything that conflicts with those already existing statutes and regulations with regard to towing. So we're operating within a kind of a narrow lane in between that floor and that ceiling about what we can do. And to Steve's point, as long as it's related to health and safety of the public.
Say, what have we identified that we maybe have some latitude in?
So one of the things that we have talked about is kind of what Steve mentioned, is saying, all right, what are the safety concerns that we've had, what are some of the reports that we've heard? Would getting out and having the tow driver do a 360 around the vehicle before hooking it up kind of mitigate some of those safety concerns that we have?
Are there specific things?
Is there a standard for the
Right.
industry?
Cause
that
usually they'll,
other
it's not,
states-
usually they don't leave it that broad, that it's just safety and you guys tell them, right, make up what you want.
And
Tell us
that's,
what's safe.
that's kind of one of the reasons we had a meeting today is to get a little more perspective from the tow driver, the HOAs, and then kind of mesh that with our safety concerns that we have and figure out what a good city approach might be that we could actually legislate to address some of those issues. Again, that falls within that floor and that ceiling already established by the state.
Have any of these issues happened on public property, or has this all been on private property?
Private property.
That further complicates and makes it even more narrow when we can't.
Cause
So public property tows only occur at the request of the police.
And can I just, I think there's two distinct things to delineate here. One is what we might loosely or flippantly call predatory actions, right? Because if they're happening on private property, our hands are pretty much tied. There's really nothing we can do. And I don't know that the public safety issue is something that should be used to try and stop predatory. Does that make sense? I think there are two separate lanes of question. There is whether or not there's predatory towing. If there is, and we think that's an issue, our really only approach is to talk with the tow companies and HOAs and encourage them to come up with a policy that works for their situation. They may have a really bad parking problem that's just, people taking advantage of things and parking all over the streets and causing problems. And in one of the cases we heard today, they said, like, they came in and he had to call for help because there were 20 cars parked illegally in the street. He's like, I can't tow 20 cars, what do I do? So that's one issue. On the other hand, there is the issue of what we saw in the video of a car running.
Yeah,
They've been coming in and
lady that
out,
contacted
people
me said,
coming
"Look,
in and out.
I stopped in front of a relative's house to drop something off, my car was running, the door was open, I literally ran up, rang the doorbell, handed it to him, turned around and they were hooking up my car."
Yeah. Which is, if they're parked where they're not supposed to be, it's technically legal. We're asking the HOAs to be considerate and to find a rule that would allow for that. The more issue though is that because it happened so quickly, a car was open, a car was running.
To me, there's a reasonable standard that needs to be met. So whatever latitude, at least for me, whatever latitude we have to help that standard be reasonable, because these instances, in my opinion, are not reasonable. I mean, whether they're safe or not, it's just not reasonable, right? I totally understand that parking problems, and we've talked ad nauseum about those sorts of things, but some of this stuff is just crazy. So whatever we can do to help mitigate that, I'm all for it.
Let me I'm just, a comment that was made that I will share, not necessarily that I'm advocating for this, but they're saying, if the police pulled you over for speeding, and you said, yeah, but I was only speeding for 2 minutes, is that okay? If you only broke the law for a really short period of time?
That's my old comparing apples and bowling balls.
I know, I'm just saying, is that if there's a violation of a parking ordinance,
So Steve, what I'm
what's
hearing,
the time?
It's like speeding only matters if you get caught.
Yeah, right.
so what I'm hearing is it sounds like there is some interest from a couple members of this body that would like to possibly see it come back on a future work meeting with maybe some additional input from our attorney and maybe possibly other sources, but
But I think some communication is from the cities warranted too, like even resources to go to, cause this is obviously gonna keep on occurring. And we've had this discussion a million times, so I think we really do need to help educate. Look, this is a state statute, right? This is where this starts. It's on, if it's private property, HOA, right? And then here's what the city can and can't do, and here's what we can.
And time out, but I think that would be a valuable thing to add to the city website. So you could say, hey, go here, harriman.org/towing.
It can't just be a
And you-
one-time thing, it needs to be, cause it's, like I said, it's gonna continue to happen.
Right.
Until the state changes.
So you can get your information here, here's how you can appeal issues, here's the state things for this, right? Here's what your rights are. Just understanding
I certainly, obviously, if there's predatory towing actions taking place, then obviously there's wrong. I'll kind of go back to just at least my previous comment is these are contracted with an HOA, and I, again, whatever we can do to help mitigate things, but I don't wanna see the city spending a lot of time and capital in trying to deal with an issue that is really between residents of an HOA
Two private parties.
and, you know, the HOA and the contracted towing company. They have to put in the effort there first, I think, and prove that it's something that extends beyond that for the city to try and weigh in. Safety issues are always a concern. Obviously, I don't think any vehicle, just comes from the profession, I mean, I don't think you move any vehicle without doing a 360 around it and making sure, whether it's just you in your personal driveway or wherever it is, I think that's just good practice. Someone hooking up and just saying, well, I can see into their car with a camera and being able to hook up and go without doing that, I think that is a safety concern.
And let's be clear about something. Just because it's lawful and just because it's in compliance with the HOA rules, doesn't mean it's not predatory. Right? I know that from my industry with mortgage lending, right? People did loans for a long time that were totally legal, completely fine, they got later defined as predatory action, right? I think it behooves the HOAs and the towing companies to work on a solution here that makes sense. Because if it continues to not make sense, it's kind of, the general rule is if you can't regulate yourself, regulation usually gets put upon you. So I'm hoping that they can find a way to self-regulate. Otherwise, I think this is an issue that's gonna come up before the legislature.
Well, I totally agree with Clint, because we've spent how much time talking about this over and over and over the last year or so, only to basically come to the conclusion there's nothing we can do. So whatever we can do to preemptively give the public resources to go to those areas, here's your area representatives, legislators, right? Take them, the HOA, here's all the HOAs in the city. Because if you're driving, because if you're going to an address to drop something off or pick something up and you don't know that, I mean, whether you should or not, you don't know it's private or HOA, let's list the HOAs, let's just give them a resource to go to. So that not only our staff, but we aren't spending hours and hours talking about something there's nothing we can do.
So it sounds like we've given some clear direction as to what we'd like staff to do. Any questions from staff as to what you're looking from us?
No, I say we did meet with one of the HOA's management. They have three, I think they said they have three communities they manage here in town. And they did seem willing to work. They get the complaints from both those who've been towed and those who want somebody towed.
So, yeah, and that's the thing is, I think one of the things we forget here is there's both sides of this argument, and there's probably several people at HOA that are very happy that it's being done the way it's being done, so. Alright, well, if that brings us to the end of our work meeting agenda, I will accept a motion to adjourn our work meeting. So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we will begin in about 15 minutes.
That's like, we know it is a problem. So why these companies, but to be lurking around the corner, just waiting for somebody to, leave the car for 2 seconds. There's a reasonable standard that's not being adhered to.